4-year-overdue promise. What I'm about to tell you is a story from when I was still in the 3rd grade of elementary school. After school, I would be the first to go home, throw away my school bag, make a U-turn, and run out of the house to a children's park not far away. The park functioned as a social gathering place in a child's way, and day in and day out, friends played there until the evening. And now, there is a boy who appears in the park from time to time. He is about the same age as the others, and his appearance is quite ordinary, but he has 3 extraordinary characteristics. One is that he sadly has no friends. The second is that he comes from a wealthy family. The other is that before coming to the park, he would go to a candy store and buy all the candy he could find, and then go around handing it out to all the kids his age in the park. When he finished handing out the candy, he would go to the children and ask them to join him in the play circle. He would say, "Please let me join you." He was a boy with such a sad habit. However, we are talking about children in the early elementary grades. It was cruel from his point of view who handed out the sweets, but righteousness does not always prevail, and when he begged them to join his play circle, he received a moderately high percentage of refusals. Looking back, however, I feel that the mindset of the children who refused was by no means unreasonable. They said, "Thanks for the sweets, but we don't want to play with you because you're boring." "But I'm not allowed to play with you because you're boring." I don't think it was an easy alienation. Rather, it was more like, "I'm sorry for the sweets, but I'm not allowed to be your playmate. It's too heavy. Even if I wanted to play with him, I wouldn't be able to break his heart." It must have been similar to the mentality of, "I understand the feeling very much, but from an adult's point of view, if you receive sweets, you should show them how good-natured you are, and if you feel pressured, you should not have received sweets in the first place." However, the 2nd and 3rd grade kids with their noses dripping with juices eat the candy and brush off the heavy boy at hand. They made a series of choices that only considered the immediate future. At the time, I was inclined to be a coward at heart, so I refused to eat sweets even if they were pushed on me. This was partly due to the fact that my parents had strict discipline regarding receiving things from others. However, I was still a brat. One day, I accepted sweets. And then, why was it given to me only then? I can't remember the reason now. But whatever the reason, I was given sweets at that time. That fact was certain. The day I received the candy, the only time I received it, and what happened after I received it are still vivid in my memory. When he had finished handing out the candy as usual, he went around talking to any children his age that he saw. It must have been a bad day for him. He was rejected at every turn, and he lifted his chin lightly and looked at a loss. I watched him as he ate a piece of candy and thought to myself, "Poor guy." He looked at me. Our eyes met. He turned his body to face me and ran straight to me. He said, "Hey, do you want to play?" Me, eh? "Ah," he said, "let's play something. What do you want to do?" I was in trouble. It is his vice, but he leaves the planning and content of the game completely up to the other person. And it's one-on-one, as if we were meeting for the first time. There is no such thing as an enjoyable game in this situation. I was willing to play with him, but I just couldn't come up with a plan. While I was at a loss, he looked at me with a face that was ready to enjoy the instructions. At that moment, with my poor 3rd grade brain, I unintentionally said to him, "I'm sorry, I can't do this right now. I'm sorry, I can't do it now." Of course, in reality, it wasn't impossible at all. I had time on my hands, but I was just trying to save the day. And his natural response was, "Are you busy? Are you busy?" "Yeah, I'm busy." Naturally, he took the bait. "So tomorrow will be okay?" No tomorrow." "And the day after tomorrow?" "I'm sorry, no." "When would you be okay?" And I gave him the most extraordinary answer. 4 years from now. I still don't know why I came up with the figure of 4 years. But to an 8-year-old boy at the time, 4 years from now was an endlessly distant, hazy, unforeseeable future. It was easy to think that I wanted to shake him out of that fog. What was next surprising was his reply to this painful answer. "Yes, I understand," he agreed. I was so surprised that I didn't think it was possible, but I said. Then I said, "Well, I'll be busy for a while, so I'm going home." I left the place saying, "Well, I'm going to be busy for a while." I had to leave now because my comment to him didn't add up, and for that reason alone, I went home and spent the rest of the day until it was time for the evening children's program. After that, whenever I saw him in the park, I moved quickly to another park and ran around, having told him that I was busy until 4 years later. One day, not long after the empty promise, he stopped showing up at the park. Children are positive and cruel. After a month, which was less than 4 years, I had forgotten all about the promise, and was spending the same time in the same park, with the same friends, and the same time again. Time flies. I entered the first grade of junior high school. The park where I used to play when I was in elementary school is now on my way to junior high school. Just past the park, the condominium where I live rises high. As I was leaving for home after class that day, as usual, I passed by a park and noticed a boy of about the same age on the opposite side of the street across the park. The boy is looking at us from a difficult place beyond the fence, the park, and the fence. However, I don't recognize his face, and he is just looking at me. It caught my attention, but I'm sure he's just looking at me by some coincidence or mistaken identity. Then, as we passed through the side of the park and came within sight of the entrance to the apartment building, my path and that of the suspicious man merged into a single path. We stood on the same street and he looked more and more deeply into my face. I felt a little creeped out and glanced at him. Our eyes met. He turned his body to face me and ran straight to me. "Hey, we had a deal 4 years ago. This is a serious story." Before and after that day, I never saw him in my hometown. And yet, on that one day, he showed up again at the place where he had made the promise. So I am guessing, but I am sure that after the 3rd grade, he had some kind of environmental change and stopped coming to that hometown that he and I had in common. But he never forgot his promise, and just to fulfill the promise he made 4 years ago, he stood by the park where we had made a promise that day, indulging himself, waiting for me to return. Such a strange and slightly spooky story. Later in the day, I picked him up at my place and we played together. We didn't have any playthings, so he just read the comic books I had, and we hardly had any conversation, and in the evening, I coaxed him to leave, saying that my parents were coming home. When he walked out the door and the door closed behind him, I felt a sense of relief, as if I had been released from a few tons of weight. I don't think we actually spent more than 2 hours together. But I'm being honest. I had been in a constant state of cold sweat down my spine since the moment he called out to me, and I took a half a second pause to remember the promise I made to him 4 years ago. To put it rudely, I felt as if I had to play with an unknown creature who looked like a human being but had a completely different mind. And I never saw him again. I never saw him again. I wonder now what it was all about. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.